I get this question all the time. Should I put my spouse on my VA home loan or not? And it all really depends on your situation, so let's dive into it. The first thing we're going to talk about is the definition of a spouse. This is where you're legally married. This does not apply to a fiancé. Yes, you can still apply for a VA home loan and not be married at that time, but just know you will have to get at least married a week before the closing and provide documentation to the lender. And no, there's no pressure to get married, by the way. This can also get a little bit complicated when you're trying to do a name change or you're planning on doing a name change, because that can take some time. So it might not reflect all the updated name, if that's what you choose, to be reflected on the loan documents and the title of the property. But the good news is that it is actually a pretty simple process to update the deed and how it shows with the name and how you do your vesting on the title with what's called a quick claim deed. Now note, in certain areas, it's very simple to do. It's $100, $125 recording fee. But in other places, it can actually be pretty expensive because you might have to pay what's called transfer taxes at the time that you do that again. So definitely do your research, talk with your realtor. If you have an attorney at the title company, ask them those questions as you're going through that, and also connect with a lender that knows what they're doing. You guys have our link to schedule a call with us down below. So let's talk about some of the factors to consider when looking at putting your spouse on the mortgage. Now, this could be either way. Both we have dual military or military non-military, but remember, a military member always has to be on the loan in order to use the VA home loan. Now, when it comes to the income piece for the spouse, the cool part about it is that the VA standards are going to be mirrored to the spouse and their requirements, which is huge because a lot of loan products out there have restrictions around this, but the VA loan is pretty loose. So kind of let's break that down. So if a spouse has a salary position, right? They're typically going to look for a 2-year history or some kind of combination of those 2 years, but important thing, never disqualify yourself. And there's a lot of exceptions to that. So one of them is going to be going back to work. If they had kids, they stayed home, they're going back to work, then and into a field that they were in before with the explanation letter, then they're actually able to do so. Another easy one is if they're finishing a degree and then going into a job, you can actually already get pre-approved with a job offer letter and not even starting. But again, that does going to require a degree or having credit hours, and you're going to submit those credit hours and degree to the lender themselves. Another part of that is, like, let's say they weren't working for a while and then they ended up working for a company that provided a training program, and upon that graduating the training program, then they were able to get the job. That same certification is going to apply in this case. So they haven't worked for 10 years and then all of a sudden they got the trade school or whatever, the program certification for that employer, then you can use all that income right away. 6-month job gaps are 100% okay. You just need to provide a letter of explanation. And if it goes longer than that, again, there is a lot of exceptions to that policy. The other type of income that they look at is guaranteed hourly, right? So that's where you're employed at an employer and you have, like, let's say a steady 40 hours a week as an example. And 40 hours is not the minimum time requirement to be full-time. Actually, every employer has a different requirements for that. So sometimes we'll see somebody get 32 hours a week and still be considered full-time. That is okay with the VA, so you're still able to proceed with that. The other thing that we get questions a lot on is that, well, my spouse works part-time. They just started their job. Can we use their income? And the thing is that it does require, so this is kind of like where before, if you're working full time, there's some exceptions to it, but there's really no exceptions on the part-time income. So you need 2 years of solid income being consistent to use all that income for the purposes of qualifying for a VA home loan. If you have less than a year, less than 2 years, but more than a year, you can actually offset debt on your credit report, like your monthly liabilities, with that income, but it still cannot be used as income as a whole for the VA home loan. If you have less than a year of that income, then none of that income can be used for the purposes of purchasing a property. If it's seasonal work, it'll apply in the same way. How is that seasonal income generated? Is it through like an agency? Is it something that you have in writing that, yes, you're going to be coming back to it every season? Okay, then you could start looking at that income. But again, it kind of goes back to having at least a 2-year history of that. Now, for let's say we have a spouse that's going to school and they're the dual military, there's different situations in this, and they collect a BAH for school benefits. You cannot use BAH because it is an education benefit for the purposes of buying a home and using that BAH to qualify. Yes, if you're on active duty, you can use all of that BAH, but it just doesn't apply when it comes to your school benefits. Another big factor is going to be the credit score and the liabilities of your spouse, right? The credit score is going to affect your interest rate and certain parameters around qualification, right? Having current lates, bankruptcies, or collections can unqualify you from a VA loan. Because remember, we've always talked about there's 2 parts to a VA loan: eligibility, time in service and character of discharge, and qualification to meet the credit collateral capacity standards to use the VA loan. Another big piece to that is that if your spouse has liabilities, right, and they don't make let's say they make $2,000 a month, but their liabilities are $2,500 a month, and then it actually affects you from an overall qualifying perspective, because now that additional debt is counting against your debt for the overall purposes of buying a property. So sometimes we'll look at a spouse's, we'll look at the veteran and spouse, and then we'll say, what, spouse has, bad credit. They don't make enough to support their liabilities. You won't qualify with them on there, but you do qualify on their own. So it just all really depends on how you massage it and what really makes the most sense. This is why looking at someone's credit and having those plans ahead of time, or at least reviewing that stuff a year or 6 months out from buying a place, is so important. The other part is from a life estate planning purpose. Now, listen, I'm not an attorney in this, but I want to just share some things that we come across all the time, especially when we talk about adding a spouse onto the VA loan or not, okay? If you pass away and your spouse is not on the VA home loan, yes, they could still be on the title of the property, but they still don't get the VA home loan, right? There's different qualifications that qualify a spouse from getting a VA home loan in the event a veteran passes away, which is going to be from pass away on active duty, then the loan transfers to the spouse, or if a veteran passes away from a service-connected disability, then the loan passes on to the spouse. That's why a lot of times people will look at that and say, well, do I want my spouse on the mortgage in the event something happens to me? They can at least keep that home with that VA home loan. That's why it's also important to understand different life insurance policies that can protect you in the event something were to happen. That way you don't have to worry about adding them to the title, because then the home would just be paid off by that insurance policy. Last thing we're going to cover is community property states. So if you live in Arizona, California, Idaho, Louisiana, Nevada, New Mexico, Texas, Washington, and Wisconsin, as a veteran, you could, let's say you apply for the home loan on your own. If you're married, your spouse will still have to provide their information for a lender to take a look at their credit. Furthermore, they're going to actually count those liabilities on your spouse, even though they're not on the mortgage, against you for qualification. Now, this is the little known secret. If you can prove your spouse can support their own debt, then the lender won't count it against you. We run into this all the time from viewers like yourself asking us like, hey, I went somewhere, they didn't accept this. This is a VA rule. This is not a lender rule. So all the things we talk about is from the VA. So hope you guys learned something new today. Hit the like and subscribe button, and we'll catch you soon.